Joining us next is Professor Charles McGhee, Maurice Paykel Professor and Chair of Ophthalmology at the University of Auckland and President of the Academy of Asia Pacific Professors of Ophthalmology. He will present on illuminating and negotiating blind pathways or sustaining research interests throughout your career. Welcome, Professor McGhee.
Thank you very much. It's a great privilege to be here today. I thought I would take a less detailed approach since there's so many lectures today from so many professors and talk about perhaps things that inspire you and keep you inspired, Dennis. I think the first thing is to say there's no perfect plan. We all think we have a plan for our careers, but don't dismiss serendipity, luck on your journey. And luck always favours the prepared mind. Here's a classic case of serendipity. We have Sir Alexander Fleming. He discovers lysozyme. He then discovers a mold sitting on the window ledge in his lab and elucidates penicillin. He writes a paper on that, and no one really is very interested. But then Florey and Chain develop penicillin as a drug, and together, fortunately, they all share a Nobel Prize, all because he found some mold in a petri dish on his window ledge. I think passion is really important. I think we all really need to drive our careers with passion. It's very easy to get lackluster and get jaded and not want to do things. But I think if you find something which you love and develop it and keep revisiting it, actually does very well. My first step on the ladder of research was ocular pathology and melanoma, and even 40-odd years later, I still do some research on melanoma. And you need fortitude. You need to be tough. Life is tough as an academic. I think in the first dozen grants I ever applied for, they were all rejected. I felt very rejected, but I kept going. I didn't think the glass was half empty. In fact, we should never think the glass is half empty. We should always think it's a refillable glass. And then you've got to think about your career in terms of your evolution and diversification. You shouldn't, I think, largely most people don't stick on one point all the way through their career. So you evolve, hopefully, to develop other interests and key interests and related interests. And that diversification can start quite early on. I've always had the theory that you keep your main research going. You think of all these little topics that you can encourage junior staff or colleagues to be involved in, and sometimes they lead you off on a new pathway. So I think from early on you should think of more than one career path in terms of your research. And then there's always looking for research gaps. It's very easy. We're often influenced by our mentors and follow down their pathways. But I think you should always be looking for novelty. What's new? Where are the gaps? You don't want to keep doing the same, plowing the same furrow, so to speak. And filling the gaps and illuminating pathways makes your research career more personal, makes it more impactful, and may make it more exciting at times. Forward planning, however, is very important. I'm always amazed by a number of colleagues who come up and they've a great idea and they haven't actually retrieved all the literature, they haven't read the literature, they haven't spoken to a statistician, and suddenly the great plan falls apart on your desk. So I think you need to do your homework. Although there is serendipity, there's also homework. And what about that search beyond your interests? My early interests were basically cornea and transplantation and external eye disease tumours. This is a list of some of the areas where I've become involved over the many years. And in fact, I think there are probably 10 pillars in my research interests that keep me going, and they're all interrelated to some extent. And some that would seem quite odd, like publication. I don't mean publishing papers, I mean being interested in editing, interested in developing, mentoring research publication. I've mentioned mentorship a few times. You cannot underestimate mentorship. I think mentorship is the key thing which we should all give and we've all received. We should all recognize our mentors. And I think you should seek that early in your career. I was very lucky. I had great mentors, and including Bill Lee in Glasgow and others, who drove and pushed me and corrected my 11 versions of my first manuscript and still said it was quite good. But I think you also can get reverse mentorship as well. So I love supervising PhD students and junior doctors and fellows, and they often give you ideas, and they challenge you and tell you they don't believe you, which is good. And I think that many of the people in these pictures are now senior lecturers or professors, and they were all at one time junior doctors. In fact, half the people in that picture were medical students at one point that I taught. I'm going to finish in the personal path, in the path less travelled. We sometimes get opportunities and you have to rise to them. In 1990, I was offered a Cornell Fellowship in Moorfields, and coming from Scotland, that was a great deal. That sounded fantastic. The same day, I was offered a fellowship in Western Australia, and I thought, winter in London or winter in Australia? I went to Australia. And Australia opened my eyes to many different things, including entrepreneurship. There's a long history of ophthalmology in Western Australia. I broke my arm there, so my ambidexterity went down a bit. I learned that not all technology needs to be new technology if you're in the outback. And I learned a lot about refractive surgery, cornea, and topography, which has been a lifelong interest. I came back to find that the job I expected to have in Glasgow had disappeared, and I was advised I should look at a job in Sunderland. What was the problem here? It was a great NHS unit with a large teaching component, but there's no research funding, no support staff, and they hadn't had a professor there since 1960. Was it a blind alley? Could I illuminate it? Well, no, I didn't think it was a blind alley because there was a university pharmacy school next door. So I was interested in pharmacokinetics. Also, they were interested in a business plan, developing an excimer laser unit. We introduced junior fellows. We had 10 consultants. We generated funding. We established the British Society of Refractive Surgery. So you always got to look at your opportunities and think, what could you do if you look at it in 360 rather than just your one main interest? And that opportunity led me to be professor in Dundee. And here we see a number of famous refractive surgeons at the foot of Robert the Bruce, King of Scotland, many years ago. And also led to a textbook with a number of people who at least one of whom's in the room. So again, opportunities arise, and their path may not be straightforward. I went from Glasgow to Australia to England, back to Dundee. And then eventually it was suggested that I might like an opportunity in New Zealand, since my wife was Australian. And so in 1999, we went to New Zealand, to Auckland, and there was 1.5 academic staff. There were 2 offices, 1 small laboratory, and there'd been approximately 1 publication per year. Now that looks like a challenge, but was it an opportunity? Well, it was an opportunity. We grew the department with a team that were very keen into it. It's all about teams, really, not individuals. And we grew to about 200 people in the New Zealand National Eye Centre. If we looked at the ophthalmology department alone, which is 1/3 of the eye centre, we now have 11 professorial posts, 7 senior lecturers, and 85 staff and students. It's following a path, it's following opportunities, and taking the path less travelled. I think the final thing I'd like to say is the most important lesson, which I don't observe myself very much, is just say no. The more successful you are, the more you rise through your academic career, the more you ask to be in every committee, to take part in every decision making. And sometimes they are just items which will detract from the main thrust of your interest. I think you've also got to think that there are many failures on an academic career. Anyone says, oh, I've always been successful, you're kidding yourself. There are so many failures when you think a major project's going down, something's not funded, you lose staff. You've got to reframe it. What could I have done better? What could we do better? How can we replace that? And then don't get bogged down with admin. As a man who probably spends a day and a half week doing admin, try and avoid getting bogged down with admin. Delegate, but most of us are bad at that. So I'll finish on this. So should we have optimism, pessimism, or a more rational optimism when we're eliminating blind alleys and we're trying to maintain our interests and careers? Well, I think we just need to always be prepared. You never know what's going to be on the other side of that barrier. Thank you very much.